Everyone, this is Dr. Michelle Campbell with Graduate Communications and Intercultural Programs. And today's video module is about avoiding plagiarism in graduate school. Let's get started. So, we should begin with some cultural aspects about plagiarism. So you should know that North American academic culture favors individualism and recognition for individual ideas and contribution. So plagiarizing ideas or words and representing them as your own is viewed as equivalent to stealing. And that is something that's very common in both North American and European academic cultures, because for a lot of people, ideas can make money, and ideas can also make careers. So they're treated very similarly, just like to an object that you might create or invent. Plagiarizing in a North American academic context or business context means you could harm your reputation, you could tarnish your personal brand, and unfortunately, you could be expelled from school or fired from a job. I will also add that sometimes people can feel like it's okay to plagiarize on a cover letter or a resume, and that's not okay. I personally know of people who have submitted plagiarized resumes for a position and they get blacklisted from a particular company or industry, and you do not want that to happen to you. So one of the ways that you can avoid plagiarism, particularly in your academic classes here at Duke University, is to, number one, make sure that you understand the style guide that's used for your discipline. So style guides are official rules and guidelines about how to format documents and cite sources in the text and on the references page. Some style guides that you might use or you might have heard of are IEEE, APA, or AMA. I would say that if you're in ECE or MEMS, you might be using IEEE. If you're in a business class, if you're in engineering management, it's possible that you actually might be using APA, American Psychological Association. APA is commonly used for the social sciences and the business world, but there's a ton of different style guides that you might be asked to use. So at the beginning of a semester or before you write a paper, you should always make sure that you ask your professor or instructor how they want you to format and cite your sources. And again, the most common ones for you are probably IEEE or APA, but there's over 50 different style guides that are used in an academic context. Every style guide is a little bit different, but all style guides require you to indicate what information is not your own and give information about how to find it. And it there means the source that you're using. Oftentimes you need to cite the authors, the year it was published, and where it was published, or the publication venue. So these are all in common. The only difference is the style, or kind of what information goes where within your text. But anytime that you're using a document or a source that is not your own or not your own idea or is not common knowledge, you need to make sure that you cite your source. So one thing that I think a lot of graduate students don't realize is you need to cite figures. So if you're giving a presentation in class, you're creating a website, or you're writing a report or a document or a seminar paper, and you include a figure could be an image, a chart, a graph, or equations, they need to be cited. If they're not your own. If you did create it out of your own data and it's your own creation, you don't need to cite it, it belongs to you. But I think most of the time, you're probably either using data that's not your own and reusing it to make it look a little bit different, or maybe pulling an image directly from the internet. Even if you're using a background image, it's still really important that you cite it. Figures may need citations in the captions if the ideas within the figures drawn within the figures drawn other research. So we're going to look at a couple examples here, and both of these examples come from the information listed right there. And you can see actually this citation is a references formatted citation in IEEE. So what does this look like? Here's an example of a reused, reconfigured figure from another journal. So this is not exactly what it looked like in the other journal, but it was kind of cut up in different pieces and assembled in a new way. But it still needs to be cited because the original data, the original information does not come from the author. So you can see the image here, and let's take a look at the caption. Figure 1, reconstructed images of biomedical data set from 143 views using FBP TV regularized convex optimization. This 14 in brackets, that's the citation. That's where the original idea came from, and it corresponds to citation 14 at the end of the document. So if I'm looking at this figure as a reader, I know that not all of this information is original to the journal article that I'm reading. And if I want to find the original source, I need to look for reference number 14 in the references section. I go to that, I find the original journal article, and I can now go look up that original journal article. Here's another example. This is a new figure created by the authors, but with citations for contributing ideas. So the authors took these images, but the underlying ideas for the images came from someplace else. So again, you can see in the caption of the figure, there's 2 citations. We see citation 65 and citation 8. And so we know that that information that comes right before that citation actually comes from a different source, or those ideas actually come from a different source. And those correspond to the citation, the references section at the end of the document. So again, if I'm a reader and I'm looking at this image, what I know is that not everything here represented in this image is original to the journal article that I'm reading. And in fact, if I want to find the original ideas, I need to go look at citation 65 and citation 8 in the references section. So another thing that we often like to talk about along with plagiarism is making sure that you find reputable sources. Because one of the things that can get you in trouble is using an unreputable source that has plagiarized from another source. So we're talking about maybe 2 degrees of distance, or 3 or 4 or 5 degrees of distance, that you're using something that has plagiarized something else. You do not want to get into that situation. So our wonderful librarian, Sarah Park, has given us some information to think about the ABCs of reputable sources. So the A is authority. The author should have some sort of authority to speak about the topic. You should determine the author's education or professional experience. Alternatively, verify the organization behind the article. A lot of people will call themselves a doctor, but you need to figure out what they're a doctor in. So for example, I have a PhD in English. You should not take medical advice from me. Just because you can call me Dr. Campbell does not mean that I have the authority to give you medical advice. So same goes for other sources. You shouldn't be taking advice or looking at a source from somebody who's not an authority to speak on that particular topic. Another thing you should check for is bias. You should check out the point of view and the purpose. Look for any bias in the information and think about the purpose. Is it to inform? Is it to persuade? Is it to sell? This is the era of fake news. There's a lot of information floating out there and not all of it is correct. And one of the reasons is because people are biased. They want to use information for their own purposes, whatever that might be. So make sure that you're looking and thinking about, is there a bias to this particular person or this particular news source that I'm looking at? What do they have in mind? What's their purpose? What's their angle? What are they trying to do with this information? The C is content. You should critically evaluate the content of the article. You should check the accuracy of the content. You should be able to verify their claims in other sources, and you cannot only rely on one source, especially if it's presented as new or groundbreaking, or, you know, 5 things real doctors don't want you to know. There's something wrong going on there. So make sure that you can critically evaluate the content and verify the claims in other sources. The last thing you need to make sure, and this is especially true because we're in engineering, you need to make sure you evaluate the currency. And here I'm not talking about the money, but I'm talking about how current or how up to date a source is of the information. Is it current? Is it still accurate or relevant? So if you're writing a seminar paper, you probably should not be using any sources that are more than 1 or 2 years old, with the exception of if you're looking at a historical event, or if you need to cite some sources to talk about the historical trajectory, for example, of a company or a product or an invention. So if you are doing kind of current cutting edge science and analysis, you should also be using current cutting edge resources and sources to be able to support your own claims. So those are the ABCDs of reputable sources. So I would like for you to do an activity with me. We are going to look at some examples of source use, and I would like for you to be able to tell me if these are reputable sources. So we'll go through them. I want you to, after we go through them, I want you to pause this video, write down on a piece of paper yes or no, and then I'll have you play again and we can check your answers. So the first one is an article from a popular news website found through google.com a reputable source? The next one is a Wikipedia page about an engineering concept a reputable source? Is an article from a trade publication found through the Duke Library website a reputable source? Is a peer-reviewed journal article found through the Duke Library website a reputable source? Is a presentation found on Prezi.com a reputable source? How about a business management blog found through Yahoo.com? Or how about a Reddit post about a startup company? So I want you to go ahead and pause this video, take a couple minutes to write down your answers, and when you're ready, go ahead and press play again. Now that you've had an opportunity to think about these and write down your answers, let's go through and check and see if you got them right. So the first one is an article from a popular news website found through google.com. The answer here is maybe, but it's probably not reputable enough to be included in your graduate level papers. Popular news websites, you know, their goal is to make money. They do provide a lot of information that's correct, but news is moving so fast that sometimes that information is not correct or it's not the complete picture. So I would say be very, very careful about using an article from a popular news website in particularly any of your graduate level papers. The next one is a Wikipedia page about an engineering concept. I hope that you said no, this is not a reputable source. Don't get me wrong, Wikipedia is a great place to go to get some basic background knowledge about a concept. But you should start with Wikipedia, don't end with Wikipedia. One of the reasons that Wikipedia is not a reputable source is that it can be edited by anyone. And so while a lot of the information there is probably correct, it's not a reputable source. And you definitely should not be using it for any of your graduate level papers. How about an article from a trade publication found through the Duke Library website? Well, a trade publication is often a publication put out by a particular industry or organization that represents an industry. So some industries are biased. So for example, there might be a trade publication put out by the tobacco industry. If there's a healthcare article put out by the tobacco industry, are you inclined to believe that it's true? Maybe not. So I would say it really depends on the industry, it depends on the information, and it depends on how you're using it. So if I was writing a paper about maybe the ways in which the tobacco industry funded healthcare studies to try to show that cigarettes were not as harmful for people's health, I could cite that as an example of what they're doing, but I wouldn't want to treat it as completely competent and reputable medical advice. The next one is a peer-reviewed journal article found through the Duke Library website. This is probably one of the most reputable sources you can find. A peer-reviewed journal article means that before it was published, it was reviewed by other experts in the field and not just the editor of the journal. So again, peer-reviewed journal articles, especially double-blind peer-reviewed journal articles where neither the author nor the reviewers know who each other are the gold standard of publishing in the academic context. The next one is a presentation found on Prezi.com. I hope that you said this is not at all a reputable source. Again, just like Wikipedia, anybody can put anything on Prezi.com. Even if they cite their sources, I would not believe them. I actually had an incident where some engineering management students did in fact cite a Prezi.com presentation in one of their papers, and the instructor was not very happy with them about it. The penultimate one, a business management blog found through yahoo.com. I would not be citing this in my graduate school papers. You might be able to find some useful information, especially if it's somebody who's an expert or well-known. But if they're that well-known, you can probably find a more reputable source. And then the last one, a Reddit post about a startup company. Not going to really be reputable at all. Again, Reddit is a website where people can post pretty much whatever they want. Anybody can post anything, and so there's no way to make sure that it's unbiased and it's reputable. So if you got all of these right, congratulations. If you did not get all of these right, I would really recommend that you reach out to your instructor and ask your writing instructor for more information about reputable sources. So unfortunately, there's some consequences to plagiarism. So if you are found to have plagiarized on a class assignment, an instructor or professor might ask you to do a new assignment. They might give you a 0. And they might ask you to do additional work. On a final exam, likely you're gonna get a 0 grade. You might get an F for the course, and you might also be dismissed from the university. You do not want this to happen. It does happen, unfortunately. If you are somebody who plagiarizes in a publication, you could get rejected, you could get blacklisted, which means the journal puts your name on a list and nobody else will publish your research. You could also face legal action. So sometimes plagiarism encounters copyright issues. So if you are taking information from someone else and and they have copyright on that information and you're representing it as your own, it's literally like stealing. The United States in particular is a very litigious society. Litigious means that Americans like to sue each other for money in court. And so people, if you're using information that's not your own and it's copyrighted, you could be sued. I actually know of a friend who's having this issue right now. She used an image in a PowerPoint that was not her own. She cited it. She put that PowerPoint on her personal website, and the copyright holder of the image is suing her for money because she's representing that information toward her own betterment. So you need to be very careful. If you have questions about copyright in particular, we do have a copyright librarian in the Duke Libraries, and your instructor would be more than happy to connect you with that librarian. The good news for you is there's lots of resources to help you avoid plagiarism. So in the Graduate Communications Center, we can certainly help you. You can speak to a librarian at Duke for some guidelines. We have software called Authenticate, where we can do a thorough check of your work for you and match it for similarity against other work. Your faculty are always very glad to help you avoid plagiarism, as are your teaching assistants. Your GSIP instructor, like me, I would love to help you avoid plagiarism. There are several other online resources from other universities, and another thing that you can do is get a full subscription to Grammarly. We are not encouraging you to purchase Grammarly, but if this is something you're already interested in doing, you can certainly purchase a subscription to Grammarly, and that has a plagiarism checker built into the full subscription. So now that you've watched this video about avoiding plagiarism in graduate school, you have an activity to complete on Sakai to be able to complete this unit. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns at all, please reach out to your GSIP instructor, and good luck avoiding plagiarism in graduate school.